it just a trick of time? We're in a world taken by madness, sadness in a sea of stolen words, broken and shattered. What mattered means no more. In a tide breaking the silence, violence is the wage of life forlorn, fighting for triumph. What happened to us all? Just fade away, melt into a memory. You can't save the day. If only you had tried. Just fade away, melt into a memory. You can't save the day. If only you had tried. We fade, pull back into the shade. We fade, pull back into the across the universe, a whisper wakes. Have you been listening for a wind of change? My ears are open, eyes aren't closed. I'm waiting for a miracle again. Have you been calling out my name? Oh. We're in a world taken by madness, sadness in a sea of stolen words, broken and shattered. What mattered means no more. In a time shaken by thunder, wonder is the seed of life forgone, crippling under. What happened to us all? We fade, pulled back into the shade. We fade, pulled back into the shade. Just fade away, melt into a memory. You can't save the day. If only you had tried. Just fade away, melt into a memory. You can't save the day. If only you had tried. Across the ocean blue, a wave will rise, consuming all who walk through day and night. My heart is beating with the drums. The breath is coursing through my lungs again. Or is it just a trick of time? We're in a world taken by madness, sadness in a sea of stolen words, broken and shattered. When
Check, check, check. Hey everyone, how's it going? It's dolltr or Claire again. Welcome back to another week of 343 TV, or another week in general. Really glad to be back here doing some more tips and tricks in live with all of you. And I hope you're having a good week. Shout out to our friends in the chat. Hi to John from Rockaway Park. Thomas is also in the chat with under 343 Labs. Thomas and I are in New York City, in that area, I think, unless Thomas is in Connecticut. Andrew, hi. Greetings again from Halifax. TWD, hi as well. And Jeff B, hello. And morning or afternoon or night, depending on where you are in the world. I was talking to one of my other friends, and they live in the Asian continent. So for them, whenever I stream at 1 a.m., it's like midnight or something. But yeah, 1 p.m. over here, it's midnight or the inverse over there. But very happy to be back here. Like I said, we are at the 343 Labs YouTube channel. Nice to see some old faces, or old names rather. I say faces, but of course, you know, we're all kind of remote at the same time. That said though, I'm pretty excited for today because I wanted to cover something that maybe we take for granted often in Ableton Live, and that's just how audio works. It's kind of bizarre. I was talking to one of my students about this, and one of my younger students in this case, and the first time I introduced them to the concept of audio after Midi, she was just like, audio is amazing. It was such a wonderful, like, pure reaction that I started thinking about that a lot. And I was like, yeah, audio is amazing. So I'm going to show you a couple of things today in live that I feel are some little tricks that you might be able to use when you're working with audio, and especially if you're working with both audio and MIDI. I feel like we're always going back and forth. Maybe in this case, I can show you how to go from one to the other one, and maybe vice versa as well, depending on how things go. Hi, Dave! Yay! Greetings. Sunny Florida, yeah. It's pretty sunny in New York today, too. I might take a walk later if there aren't too many people. Bring a mask along. Stay safe. Hope everyone is staying safe. But yeah, let's see if we can get started. So over here, I've got an empty track in live, and I'm in session view, and I'm just going to also close this up. It's my monitoring section. That's just for me. But I have an empty MIDI track over here, and as you can see, it's in this orangey brown color. If you've tuned into my other streams, you'll know that maybe that's a good guess for doing something with drums. I always like color coding my tracks, MIDI, audio, regardless of what they are, according to certain colors. And for me, I usually think of drums as being a warm color, red, orangey types of things. So what I wanted to do today is start off with a drum loop and talk a little bit about cool things that you might be able to do with warping in live. So let's head over to the packs in live, and if you want to, you're more than welcome to follow along as well. So that's why I'm going to be using specifically the samples from the core library in live. So I'm going to head over to packs under places in the browser, and then I'm going to go to these core library pack, and then underneath samples there's a whole bunch of loops that you can start kind of hanging out with. And maybe let's get a suggestion from the chat as well for any number between 100 and 200. Any number between 100 and 200. I always feel like whenever I say that, it's like I feel like a little bit like a game show host, but any number between 100 and 200 from our friends in the chat, please. And over here, though, what I'm going to do is, while I'm waiting for that number, I'm going to maybe pick a loop that we can use. And let's go ahead and open up this breaks category. Let's see if we get anything that we like here. Ooh, that's cool. Ah, yes, this drum and bassy thing is pretty neat. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to click, and yes, keeping in mind that this is a MIDI track, let's see what happens when I click on this audio file and drop it onto the MIDI track. So just to maybe put everyone on the same page, especially if you're tuning in for the first time, welcome. The difference between audio and MIDI in live is that, well, there's some similarities. The similarity between the two of them is that they're both kinds of information that we're using in live as producers to communicate with the software and tell it what to do. That said, MIDI itself is really more like a I often call it some kind of like messenger. They're a little bit like the people who are in charge of carrying your message to the program and telling it, okay, I want you to play this sound, versus audio actually contains sound itself. But what we're going to do today, like I said, is work with audio. And for that, we usually need an audio track. But if I drag this audio loop onto a MIDI track, the cool part is that Live automatically detects that and it switches it to an audio track immediately. So sometimes there would be confusion between like, oh, what exactly is audio and MIDI? But in this case, if you have a MIDI track pulled up and you drag an audio loop onto it with nothing else on it, the audio loop is going to make that an audio track. Cool. So in the YouTube chat, I see some good numbers. One of them is from Dave, who was the first person. So let's do 162 as the tempo for today. And let's take a listen back to this. Cool. So I guess it was kind of suitable anyway that we had some kind of drum and bass related sound in a way. What you might have also noticed is that before this, when I dropped my audio loop into Live, before I even switched the tempo to 162, Live actually detected the original tempo of the loop as 172, which is pretty neat. So this was the original tempo. Also going to make this a little softer, but let's change that tempo to 162. Great. Now, we might not notice anything super drastic at the moment, but maybe if you were astutely listening, you might have heard a little bit of a difference when I changed the tempo. So check this out. I'm going to make this a little bit softer again so that I'm not competing with it too much. So not softer, louder. I'm going to make this louder, and we're going to listen to what happens when I change the tempo and make it slower or faster. Here we go. Yeah. Cool. Let's bring that back down to 162. But what's happening? You'll notice that as I am making this particular loop faster, it is increasing in pitch. It's going up. As I'm making it slower, it's also coming down in pitch, starting to sound a little bit more like maybe a record slowing down. And that's exactly what this is doing. Oftentimes when we work with audio and Live, we're dealing with something called warping. And that refers to an algorithm that's used in Live that affects the tempo as well as the pitch of certain pieces of audio. So tempo refers to speed, pitch refers to how high or how low something is. The faster the tempo in this case, the higher the pitch. And that's because we are set to a warp mode or a specific kind of algorithm that's called repitch. And there are several kinds of warp modes available in Live. One way that I can look at these is if I head over to the sample section in clip view in Live, which is this lower section over here. There's this drop-down menu under the button that says, this little radio button kind of thing, that says warp. And if I click on this drop-down menu, I get a couple of options. I can see beats, tones, texture, repitch, which is our current option, complex, and Complex Pro. So there are 6 different kinds of warp modes in Live available for users. And each of these is going to give you a different characteristic to the way that you're handling your audio. What we have now is repitch, and this is very similar to using turntables and records. Do we have any DJs or turntablists in the chat? If you are a DJ or a turntablist, let us know in the YouTube chat, and we can say hi. Also wanted to say hi to Nisargoy, I hope I'm saying your name correctly and not butchering it too much. And hi also to Scott. Howdy. Greetings. We are working with some audio today and talking about warping and different ways that we can creatively work with audio in Live and maybe with a little bit of MIDI stuff as well. But here, back over here, we are in repitch at the moment. This means that it's kind of similar to using a turntable because if anyone is a DJ, like I asked in the chat, you might know that when you speed up a record, it'll become higher in pitch. When you lower the pitch of when you slow down a record, it's going to be lower. So that mirrors this a little bit. This is really cool though, because you can kind of control one thing, but have a different, a different parameter also be affected at the same time. Like you don't have to control both the tempo and the pitch at the same time. They're kind of inverse of each other, which is pretty neat. That said, there are different kinds of warp modes for different purposes. That's why these warp modes exist. So let's explore a couple of them. I'm going to head over here and let's start off with beat. I feel like beats is the most common, and for a lot of people, it tends to be the default setting in live. There's a couple of ways that you can work with beats mode, and you can even set up your default warp settings in live in the preferences as well. Maybe we'll get to that a little bit later if we have time. But for now, we can also change it directly from this clip view. So we've got Beats over here, and what Beats does is it's an algorithm that tries to preserve a lot of transient information. So that means when you're dealing with things like drums or things that are super percussive in their sound, where you can clearly see the waveform kind of starting and ending in the envelope of that. For example, I'm going to zoom into this waveform. We can see these transient sections, these transient points with very transient information. And that's really good for dealing with things like drums. So now see if you can listen to what happens when I make this slower or faster. Cool. So we get a lot of that rhythmic information retained, and that's the power of using beats. I often use beats a lot whenever I'm dealing with anything that's remotely percussive. You'll notice also that when we change this to beats, we started getting another knob in the sample section that became available to us to use, which is pretty cool. This is the Transpose Knob, and if we have any of our other friends who have tuned in to our other streams before, you'll know that we've talked about transposition, especially when I spoke about cool things that you can do when looping, changing transposition from push as well for hardware stuff. But yeah, now if we're in beats mode, we're able to transpose this independently of the tempo as well. So I could make this super fast and super low in pitch, for example. So I'm moving the tempo up to, let's see, 214 at the moment, and drop the transposition down so that you get something like that. You could also, of course, do the inverse. So make this transpose up, but slow it down. And from here, you can get some pretty interesting sound design kinds of tools. So I've used this a lot, plenty of this in a lot of different kinds of tunes that I've made, and maybe if you listen to a few of my tracks, you might be able to hear some of that. I'm going to reset the transposition though, and I am also going to set this back to 162. And later I'll kind of get back into the benefits of using certain modes with other sorts of modes too, but let's dive a little bit into the other warping modes. So I've got beats over here. There's another mode that's called tones, and this actually might be a little bit easier to hear if I slow this down even more. So let's see. Okay, we had another suggestion just now from Jeff in the chat, that was in the YouTube chat, that was even a little bit lower than 162, and it was 122. So let's do that instead. Let's do 122 and see what happens to our drum and bass type of loop if we are on beats first. So here's beats. Generally still pretty all right. You can hear a little bit of crispiness start to kind of come into the frame. Let's change this to tones. Ooh. So something a little bit different. And what I'm going to do to maybe encourage a little bit of more perceptive listening, especially if you're a producer as well, put on your producer ears. And I'm going to switch between beats and tones. And maybe someone might be able to tell from I know the YouTube algorithms for sound are always a little bit strange, but if you hear something different, let us know in the chat. Here's beats first. And now here's tones. Beats. Tones. Cool. So it might be easiest to hear if while I'm waiting for like any comments in the chat about the differences in tone that people might be hearing. The easiest thing to listen out for in this case might be the kick drum. And that's because what tones does is it's really great for handling specific kinds of tones, as you might be able to guess from the name, and specifically monophonic information. Usually when we're saying monophonic, we're referring to things like a melody. So it could be cool for a vocal, it could be cool for a synth sound. Maybe some kind of guitar that's playing a single line as opposed to chords. So that's what tones I find is really great for. And similarly to beats, you can also change the transposition, and changing transposition will also make the sound a little bit different. So let's see if we can listen out for this. Here is transpose all the way up with tones, and here's beats. Here's tones. So you can end up doing some pretty interesting stuff with this, and I'll show you a technique that I use later for dealing a lot with these. Let's introduce one last warp mode for now before I head over into the other things as well. Dave, kick has a more pitch sound in tones than beats. Yeah, absolutely. So that kind of also speaks to the purpose of the warp modes, right? So I'm glad that that was maybe a little bit slightly perceptible through YouTube and through the streaming stuff. Let's do one more, and that is textures. Textures is generally, I like using textures a lot on pads. I find that they sound really good because, as the name implies, you get different kinds of textures. But check this out. Here's what it sounds like. It's like, oh, that graininess, which is actually pretty neat. I do quite like that a lot. Maybe it's just my, I was listening to, I have been listening to a lot of Kraftwerk. I'm a big Kraftwerk fan. I feel like this is almost bringing me a little bit back to their like super early period with like We Are the Robots and not We Are the Robots, the Robots. The track is just called The Robots. Any other Kraftwerk fans in the chat? Hey Max, it is Max, our co-founder. Hello Max, hope everything is great in Berlin. Max is currently in Berlin, and that's because maybe this is a good moment to mention that we have a location in Berlin. There have been some really neat activities going on there. Max has been busy organizing crazy amounts of like workshops and stuff. And also we have a mastering course, I think, on the Berlin side that's coming up. And for anyone who might be tuning in for the first time, 343 Labs is a school that was initially only based in Manhattan, but we now have a Berlin location. So that's a really interesting thing to consider if you have not heard of that before. But you can check us out at the website. It's 343labs.com or 343labs.de if you're looking at the Denmark side. Yeah, Kraftwerk from Bug Tank. Oh, here's a funny anecdote, and I won't deviate too much from this, but if y'all have watched our previous streams, you'll know that I'm really big into live performance stuff, right? So I got really obsessed for a while with watching Kraftwerk's live performances, just because I found it so funny that they all looked as if they were always checking their email. So I made a joke about it with a couple of my students and peers also who do a lot of live performances, and it's like, how successful do you need to be where you get to the point of Kraftwerk where people will just watch you go to a show, watch you and check your email on stage? And they're actually, it's really a joke. I hope I'm making that clear. They are doing lots of stuff. It's just that I think they present a very stoic demeanor for all of themselves, and there's 4 of them live on stage. So if you've ever seen their performances, especially from the Maximum Minimum live sets, they all look like they're just checking their emails, but they're actually doing lots of stuff. There have been some really neat overhead shots of their performances that people have seen, and they're doing like all sorts of crazy controllerism stuff behind. There's like touch strips. One of the members does live visuals, so that's what you're kind of seeing on stage too. And then they also have this kind of protocol where they're like typing to each other, and there's this huge thing I do with my own students who learn performance from me, where we like break down a lot of performances by live artists, and we figure out what they're actually doing. Yeah, totally. DE equals Deutschland, which is Germany. Yes. Thanks, Max, for clarifying that. And Dave mentioned big fan of Autobahn. Yeah, totally. There's no judgment at all. Yeah, cool. So Max just said that too. Yeah, I love Autobahn as well. I think my favorite track from them is probably Tour de France. It's such a bop. I love it so much. I'm getting so excited now. But anyway, that kind of reminded me about this. Back to our pseudo sort of thing. But this is texture, and you might even be able to hear from texture and tones the difference between them. With texture, you get a little bit more of that grainy stuff, which is maybe what you want, which I'll bring bring up a little bit later as well. But yeah, those are three different tones, three different warp modes that I like to use a lot to experiment with different kinds of sounds. The other warp mode that we looked at just now was repitch. And then we also haven't looked at Complex and Complex Pro yet. And that's because Complex and Complex Pro are pretty good for vocals. So what I'm going to do now is a quick little demo. Let's try this out, everyone. So I'm going to set this back to beats. I'm going to return the transposition to 0, and you can reset any control in Live by double-clicking on it. That'll put it at its default. Let's also bring this up to the tempo that Dave had just now, so that's 162. And I'm going to go ahead and create a new audio track and maybe record in some vocal stuff. So I'm also going to, in the meantime, pull up my vocal rack, which you would have seen me build and deconstruct in previous streams as well. So let's look for my vocal rack. Where is my vocal rack? It is over here. Yeah, great. And I'm going to switch over there as well. So here we go. Yeah, great. So switching back for a moment, but what I'm going to do is maybe record in 1 or 2 sets of vocals. Maybe let's do like 2 layers of vocals and let's see what we get. So also going to make sure that I have the right thing armed. So maybe record some kinds of vocal textures or tones or layers. Let's see what we can do with these vocal layers. And while I'm at it, let's go ahead and create a new Midi track as well. And I'm just going to use this to give myself a reference pitch because I do not have perfect pitch. So I would like to give myself a note to at least take a couple of things from. So let's go ahead and create a track with a pad on it. Let's get something from Operator. Let's get a simple tone, maybe. Cool, let's get this 5th pad. Creating a new empty MIDI clip by double-clicking in an empty clip slot. And let's put a C across. So now, if we launch this scene in Live, cool. Cool, let's loop some stuff. And as a reminder, if you watched our stream from last week, we did some live looping stuff. So if you want to head back over there and check it out, you can remind yourself of live looping. Here we go. Great. That was fast. But yeah, let's see if we can zone in on one of the audio loops that I created over here of my voice. And you might notice a couple of things. First of all, when I recorded this audio immediately in, it managed to warp to the tempo. So that means that I recorded it in, and we were able to get this 2-bar loop because of when I started stopping and looping this particular clip. And if we look at warp modes, it's immediately switched to beats. Now, this is the part about Live that gets very confusing for a lot of people. And it's also a part of the argument that people make when they say, oh, Live sounds less good than other music softwares. Usually if they say that, first of all, you'll know that they are not an Ableton Certified Trainer like Max and I are. Second of all, you'll know that they probably don't actually have that good an understanding of audio. And third of all, they very clearly haven't read the Ableton Reference Manual. So if you have read the Ableton Reference Manual, then you'll know that most of the time, Live is able to preserve audio in its exact state, unless you set its warp mode to something else. And that's an entire chapter in the Live Reference Manual, and I think their audio fact sheet section. I think it's called audio fact sheet. If someone could corroborate that, that would be great. But for my memory, because I haven't remembered the exact name of the chapter, but I think it's audio facts or audio fact list or something like that. And it says that beats, having a warp mode set to beats, will make something completely neutral. In Ableton's terminology, and by this I mean Ableton the company, you'll know that I draw a distinction that's very clear between Ableton as the software and Ableton is the company and Live as the software, and I'll show y'all something funny in a little bit. But yeah, so if you set something to beats or tones or texture, and you don't change the pitch or you don't change the tempo of a piece of audio, it's going to be completely neutral and it's going to retain its original sound. That said, if you do set it to the two other warp modes that I haven't talked about, which are Complex and Complex Pro, you will change the tonality of that particular audio. And it's a little hard to tell at first, but let's see if we can try to do a little bit of active listening through YouTube. So here we go. I'm also going to turn off the effects at the moment. Or actually, let's turn off the reverb and the delay, but we'll keep the compression. Cool. So what I want to do, also because I'm gonna set it to this track. There we go. Cool. So that's what we got. This is set to beats. Let's see what happens if I change this to complex. So this is very, 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 very subtle. But the moment I switched the warp mode to complex, there was a little bit of different audio timbres introduced. I was switching between beats and tones and textures, and we didn't really hear anything different. And maybe you might have to try this on your own as well in live. I think that's one of the beautiful parts of this, right? It's like if we're interested in live, we can do all sorts of weird experiments and get really funky and cool with it. But yeah, Complex and Complex Pro. It's gonna sound different. Versus beats. Check. Yeah. Okay, cool. We're back. See, that's one way that I feel like you're always doing good work. If you're able to crash live, that's kind of a good sign. So let's get back to this. I'm excited to bring live back to you in a moment. Hopefully. No? Yes? Yes. Cool. Yeah, great. We're back. So you'll also, and this is a quick moment, a tiny segue. Every time you get a crash report, everyone, please send that to Ableton the company. You can send the file to crashes@ableton.com. And that's because it is pretty useful for them to know what goes on in a crash report, especially if they are always trying to make things better. So if you want to make live better and be a good community contributor, please send your crash files to Ableton. The crash reports are really useful, like I said, and you can just click on this over here. I'm going to click on it too, and it's going to open up another Finder window for me on my Mac, or Windows Explorer if you're on a PC. Cool. So I know where the file is. Now I can close out the window, and I will be sending that to Ableton after this stream. But here we are. We're back again. And what I want to also do is save this particular set, just to make sure that I am all good to go. So saving that. And cool, we should be good now. So let's head back to our audio situation over here. We were over here on this particular audio track playing with this particular sound. We had complex set up and we were toggling between complex and beats to kind of hear some subtle differences. That said, another thing to be mindful of though is why do even complex and complex pro exist in the first place if they're said to be not as good? And that's because they're really good whenever you are changing tempo or whenever you're transposing something. So they're good for that purpose. I should also mention that anytime that you use an instance of Complex or Complex Pro, that process takes about 10 times the amount of CPU as it would if you set something to beats or to tones or to texture. Especially if you're not changing the tempo or the pitch of anything, would strongly, strongly recommend, especially if it's like vocals or any kind of, how should I say? Yeah, more rich material like guitar or stuff like that. Please, set it to beats. Unless you're changing like tempo and pitch, for example. So like I mentioned over here, let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to actually rename these couple of tracks very quickly. I'm going to call this Vox 1, Vox 2. And I'm going to make copies of both of these tracks. And I'm going to call the third and fourth track plus 12 and plus 12 because these two were going to change their pitches. So let's switch all of these to complex. But we will, or let's switch the first two back to beats. We'll switch the second two to complex. And we'll bring these up by an octave, which is 12 semitones. So if I launch this entire row now, we'll be able to get different kinds of layers. And I'm also going to put back the effects for now. Let's also close up this rack. We don't need to see all of these nested devices. And cool, just making sure everything looks good. Yeah, cool. So we should be all good with these. Yeah, it looks like we're good. Okay, cool. Let's close these up as well, just so I can see. Great. So now let's launch this entire scene and let us see what we get. Let's also make these a little bit quieter too. Here we go. Make the vocals louder. Cool. And now you can kind of hear like, okay, we have a second layer that's pitched up an octave higher. But the cool thing though about Complex and Complex Pro is that they can make these particular vocals sound pretty nice and sound kind of a little bit more, I hate using the word normal because I feel like it's not the best descriptor, but a little bit more, I guess, akin to the original sound quality and timbre of the vocal. So here is the pitched up vocal in complex mode. A little chipmunky at the moment. And this is in complex. If I make this Complex Pro, what's happening is that Complex Pro is able to retain the formant of the original sound as well. So this means it's kind of, in very simple terms, it's almost as if I was originally singing this an octave higher rather than having us transpose this an octave higher. Being able to retain the formants is something that you can only get in Pro versus Complex, but because of that, again, also more CPU. Now though, if I had this set to beats, let's see what happens. This could be pretty cool, but you'll be able to hear that start to break up a little bit as well. Because beats, like I said, kind of detects the transients, right? So in this case, Live has gone in, tried to be very analytical and said, oh, I'm hearing even more transients than there actually are. So that's a little bit of a strange situation, but it could be something cool for sound design, and maybe a kind of hoping that I think a couple of people might be interested from that as well, because when I discovered warp modes, like my mind was totally like pew, totally blown. But here we go. That's beats. Let's listen to tones. Here's beats. Here's tones. And you'll notice that in this case, tones doesn't actually sound too bad. And that's because it's a monophonic line that I was singing. It might have been a little bit different if, say, I was using a vocoder, and you would have seen me use maybe some kind of vocoder in previous streams that I've done, recorded that audio to. So that would have been different as well. You get a little bit of that. Now, texture. you can kind of hear that slowly start to break out a little bit as well. So different. So each of these will be different and kind of useful. If I do put this into repitch, we won't really hear anything different. And that's because everything kind of reverts back. You get the transposition disabled when you set something back to repitch. So for now, though, I do want this to be an octave higher. So I'm going to set this to Complex Pro. And let's do the same thing for this higher harmony also. So now we'll get something like this. Cool. You'll notice I was kind of like playing around with different sorts of layers too. Now, the cool thing about doing this and being able to work with audio so much in live, and this is also harking a little bit back to one of my previous streams where I talked about looping, which I believe was the stream immediately before this one. And I spoke about how you can do some really neat things with processing vocals and setting things up so that they're all taking audio from different tracks. So here's one thing that I like to do a little bit of sometimes, and which I'll demo in this case. So I'm going to set up a new audio track, and it's going to be Command T or Control T. I'm going to put it all the way at the end. But let's say I really liked what I did with this, the vocal samples that I had over here. And specifically, I liked it when I had two of these layered together. So one in a lower octave and one in a higher octave. And I want it to be able to, in a way, re-record that so that I can use it independently. And there's a really neat feature in Live for that called resampling. Let us know if you've heard of resampling in the chat, everyone. Maybe we have some resampling fans over here in the YouTube chat. And yeah, let's see what we can do. I'm going to also rename this particular track Resampling to prep us for this. But what resampling does is it's a function in Live that essentially listens to anything that's playing in Live at the moment, and it'll give you the ability to re-record that. So that's something that I do when I find interesting sounds sometimes. I use resampling to help me out. I'm going to disable the reverb and delays. Oh, actually, no, let's keep those. Great. Now I'm going to head over to my resampling track. Yeah, cool. So Dave's heard of resampling. And instead of doing audio from external in, which is from my interface, my mic, I'm instead going to set this to audio from resampling. Now you'll notice this too. Now, instead of getting a monophonic input, which like is one, not monophonic, a mono input, really just mono, not monophonic, a mono input, which means just like one direct input, so say one microphone as opposed to two microphones, I'm getting a stereo input, and that's because all the audio in Live is coming out in stereo. So you can see that in the resampling section also. It looks very tiny. You can kind of see that. But you can see the levels kind of bouncing up and showing that it's two inputs instead of just one. If I arm this track, we're not going to hear anything because thankfully Live, whenever you set something to resample, monitoring is automatically set to off. And that's because if you didn't have monitoring off, you would get this crazy feedback loop that would wreak havoc. So what I want to do now is, you're not going to hear me for a minute. I'm going to mute my mic, but I will start resampling stuff and start listening to what we're resampling. So here we go. Cool. So back again. What I just did is I recorded a sample of those two things happening. So I'm going to stop all clips at the moment, but let's listen back to our resampling thing. There it is. There's our recorded audio. Another thing I like to do sometimes is resample interesting kinds of things that I've done to, say, drums or bass. And so I'm going to make a copy of this particular drum clip. And what I'm going to do is stop everything, stop all clips, and I'm going to play back my drum clip, but maybe let's find something interesting to do. So actually, why don't we get a suggestion from the YouTube chat? So let's do, if anyone could suggest a warp mode that I have covered, and also any number between 1 and 48. So a warp mode and any number between 1 and 48. While I'm waiting for that to do the drum resampling, let's head back over here to the resampling clip that I already recorded. So again, any kind of warp mode and any number between 1 and 48. And you'll see why in a second. But heading over to this resampling clip also, one thing that I sometimes like to do once I've done some resampling is also just make sure that the volume of the particular clip is a little bit louder, and it's almost a little bit like self-normalization in a kind of way. But from the sample controls over here, so the same place where we controlled the warp mode, the transposition stuff, there's also a function that lets you boost up the volume of an individual clip as opposed to in a track. So for example, here, I can bump this up all the way until maybe I'm about... Let's bump it up by like 16 decibels. So we get something that's a little bit more filled out as a waveform and a little bit less shallow in its depth. So I'm also going to make this a little softer. And now we'll be able to hear that pretty audibly. So here we go. So it's a little bit louder. And this is cool because then we can do a couple of other things, including splicing. We can even further change this some more. So if I wanted to change the transposition, you can do some pretty neat things with it. Okay, cool. We have some suggestions. TWD, let's take your suggestion. Let us do beats 35. Okay, cool. I see. So let's do beats. Yeah, let's do beats 35. Let's go for it. So I'm going to head over to my drums track again. Going to stop all of my clips. Here we go. Here are our drums. We got this set to beats mode, and let's transpose this up to be up by 35 semitones. So the cool thing about transposition in live is that you can transpose things up to 48 semitones above and 48 below. So that's why I asked for any number between 1 to 48. But let's do plus 35. And what I want to do now is resample this again. So let's give this a shot. I'm going to mute myself. And let's do this. Cool. So I was laughing a little because I think that sounds awesome. And so I'm going to stop that drum clip now, but check out this resampled clip. Let's also bump up the volume before we get too deep into things. Maybe let's make it like, yeah, let's do, I think 10 is good for now. Cool. And you might notice that we even kind of get tones from it, right? Which is pretty cool as well. And with these two resampling kinds of things, now I can kind of treat them a little bit differently also. There's a ton of cool things that you can do with audio that you've recorded in live, and I'm really just going to scratch the surface a little bit in the remaining time that I have. But this particular drum beat, for example, this drum beat, quote unquote drum beat, you might be able to hear that there are also a couple of tones in them, right? So let's say we wanted to, I believe this loop that we initially had was, let me bring these two down a little as well. This initial loop that we had all together, kind of like a C minor-y sort of feel. So now let's see if we can maybe let this drum loop help us a little bit out with that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to head over to this drum loop that I've recorded. I'm going to right click on it, and I'm going to say convert. There are a couple of things that you can do whenever you right click on an audio clip, and maybe I'll walk you through all of this. So there are 4 main options that pop up with being able to convert recorded audio into anything that's MIDI related. You can do something that's called slice to new MIDI track, which is pretty cool. And let's see what this does. So let's create 1 note per slice. Yeah, let's do that. Let us, go ahead and just hit the default. And live might take a while to be able to figure out and convert stuff. So just be patient with live. It's working hard and it's doing well. So let's switch over. Cool. So now, check this out. We've got the entire loop that I recorded kind of split up all the way, and it's tons and tons of slices. So if I play back this entire loop, and over here, essentially each of these little parts has been kind of warped and twisted in a little way and split up into all of these different slices, which you can see over here. It gets a little crazy. That's it though. One technique that I like to use for some kinds of like random sorts of drums when I'm working with slices is to kind of play around a little bit. So what I might do now is record arm this particular track and also unarm that track. I'm going to turn on my computer MIDI keyboard. That way I can play some of these with my computer keyboard that I have over here. And yeah, let's just go for it. Let's record a new audio thing. I'm also going to rename this particular track Drum Slices. And let's figure this out. Let's record some stuff. Let's also set up the click. Cool. I'm just clicking on my computer keyboard. You notice I went a little bit crazy. Once I've done that though, I can select all of these slices and quantize them. So let's quantize these to 16th notes. Great. And here is our new drum slices. Let's put that in our first column over here. So now you might notice also something that that it's clashing a bit, especially if you have a little bit of... Oh, I just noticed TWD Industry said, yes, time for some glitch jungle. Yeah, absolutely. Some jungly times for today. But yeah, you might also notice that we're kind of like a little bit maybe out of tune. And that's because when we chose the specific number that we wanted to change this by the pitch of, we didn't choose something that was like exactly an octave above a note. So one thing that you can do, even after you've sliced something up, is come into each of these different samples, and if there are any notes that are a little bit different in their pitch, you can kind of transpose them a little bit. One thing I do like to do sometimes though is resample this again and then play with that too. So I'm gonna create another track as well. I'm going to call it Resampling 2. And this is going to be my resampling of the other sampling that I've done. So I'm also going to stop all clips, mute myself, and then we'll go about doing this. So here we go. Cool, job well done. We'll stop all of these clips at the moment now. And I'm also going to recolor this last track over here, maybe yellow, just to differentiate that from other parts. Now, if I play this back, we've got this. Let's bump up the volume. And we can even play with more transposition stuff. And let's see if we can listen for what sounds good. So that's one thing that we started doing. You'll notice that I brought this up even more in transposition, and now it's kind of like glitching out in the back. Yeah, so that's kind you one thing that you can do. Another thing that you can do, and I know I'm running out of time a little bit, but just to maybe whet your appetites a little bit, slice to new MIDI track is the first function that you see out of the 4 that I mentioned. The other 3, convert harmony to new MIDI track, convert melody to new MIDI track, and convert drums to new MIDI track, can be used in pretty creative ways to be able to create different kinds of sounds. So I know that's a very vague statement, so I'm going to show you a couple of ways. One way that we could do this is, let's say I have my voice just now, right, being looped. What if I wanted to convert that to some kind of melody on a new MIDI track? Let's go ahead and try that out. So I've got this over here. We might get some interesting results for this. So I'm going to stop all clips, and I had this with all of the reverb and delay. So we might get some interesting artifacts. But let's see what happens if I right-click and say convert melody to new MIDI track. We're back. We're back. We're totally back. Cool. Let's give Live a second to restore the set. And interestingly enough, the audio will restore first. So for now, even for me, Live hasn't even opened up yet. Yeah, here it is. Great. So I'll give it one more second to kind of revive itself in the moment. Hopefully it does revive itself. Yeah, great. Here we are. I'm also going to save this, and while it's saving, I will show it to you again. We're going to power through this, everyone. It's going to be great. Yeah. And we're back. Amazing. I do think it's a little bit of, a dangerous game, because I am also trying to do lots of crazy stuff in Live. It may not look crazy, but this is actually the beta version of Live, which is open to the public. So if anyone wants to join the beta version, you can do that. A TWD. Would this be considered a tip or a trick? I think it would be considered both. I feel like a lot of the sometimes people, maybe it's a tip in the field of, say, sound design. Sometimes people are like, what are some suggestions you have to be able to creatively, have different kinds of processes? So I guess that's one thing that you could do from a sound design perspective. But trick-wise, I think that's a cool thing to be able to try out in any kinds of situations where you want to be a little bit more creative and experimental. So let's try this out again. Let's convert melody to new MIDI track. And yeah, there we go. And it might take a little bit, but you can see the progress box kind of moving across the way, which is great. That's exactly what we want. And this will be the last thing that we do before we finish up. But you'll see that if Live cooperates, and as I'm narrating over this, you can see the progress box kind of go. Maybe while we're rating, if anyone has any questions, feel free to drop those into the chat. I feel like by the time I finish the sentence, it would have broadcast to YouTube, and then people would be able to ask questions, and we can kind of work on all of these timing related things. So if you have any questions in general, please do leave them in the chat. You can also check out the 343 Labs website at 343labs.com if you're interested in finding out more about the classes that we offer. Oh, TWE was making a joke about the crash. Yeah, I feel like that's maybe more of a trick then, because it's funny. I've done a lot of these before where people are like, oh, if Live crashed, then if Ableton crashed, it must not be good. And I go like, well, the company isn't really crashing. They're doing pretty well, actually. And yeah, I think people don't really understand, I do a lot of weird things with Live. So that's why my Live is purple, for example. That's a little crazy too. But yeah, let's check out what is going on with this. Amazing. So I now have this crazy sort of situation where it actually did a really, really bad job at creating different kinds of detecting different MIDI notes. But with this MIDI information, I can still do some pretty cool stuff. For example, I can make all of these, get into the, I'm going to also make this softer in volume so that we don't kill all of our ears. I can kind of consolidate these and bring them into the same octave so that I'm not having to, look at all of these different sounds. So let's bring these up a little bit, 2. And now let's drop these down by 2 octaves. If I quantize these, I can get some interesting notes out of them. I can start playing with space. And they could go along with the other sounds too. So cool. So that was like our weird little strange thing that we did when making this entire thing. So yeah, that was pretty neat. I'm going to save this. I might use this for later. Ooh, Dave. Yeah, so we'd love for you to break down the contents of the CML Vocal Rat in the future. I have, actually. So maybe that was a stream that you missed already. You might be able to tune into it if you look at some of the replays. People who have watched all of the streams will be able to have seen that before. I did break it down several times. Yeah, TWD. Does Live support a rolling autosave? I have something like that set up where editing podcasts. Yeah, absolutely. So that's what actually happened. If you saw when I opened, well, you didn't actually see because I had the screen blacked out. But whenever you reopen Live, it does load up a previous backup. So it's a little bit like similar to like Microsoft Word and other stuff like that. So absolutely, Live has that. And it also has a backups folder of Live sets for certain projects that you might not have saved recently, but you can also set those settings in your Live preferences too. But we are at the hour, everyone. So thank you so much again for tuning in. It's been really fun sharing about some audio stuff with you. We might continue this next week, and maybe I'll show you a couple more tips and tricks. And maybe Live will be so appreciative that it crashes a couple more times for us so that I'm able to test my ninja-ness with how fast I can get back up. But I think I did pretty well. I'll go back and check out how long I took to solve those issues. But yeah, like I said, thanks so much for tuning in, everyone. If you want to find out more about 343 Labs, we have links in the chat on YouTube that have some really neat kinds of information provided. Next week, let's talk maybe a bit more about audio. Perhaps we'll get to sampling and not just resampling as well. And yeah, it's been really great to share as always. And I am excited to see all of you next week. So please have a great week, everyone. Also, I would like to say that the song that's going to play in the outro is my latest single. It got released on Friday. The song that you heard in the intro for today, actually, is my single that's going to be released this Friday. So this is all from my upcoming EP that's coming out on the 21st of August. It's called Crumble. And I'm excited to share it with all of you. So I hope you give it a listen if you are looking for some new music. It's going to be a 5-song EP out on the 21st of August and 3 singles before that. So we've got Ashes, which is coming up after this. Fade, which is coming up on Friday. That was at the intro of this. Yeah, thanks so much, everyone, again. Yay, thanks in the chat, everyone. Hello, and goodbye to all of y'all. See you next week. Bye.
Morning light, break me through the dark. One so bright, show your dying star. away, try to run away, run away. Tell me if you could save me. Got me falling through ashes in the dust of the winter blue. Crying no, take me back home, don't leave me alone. Keep me from running to you, still lost in the ashes in the wake of the burning truth. Rising no, up in the night, don't put out your firewall. Keep me from longing for you. Awake, caught in fantasies, replace broken memories. Gonna find a way, gotta throw away all of what you gave, no, can't let this go. Wanna hide away, try to run away, tell me if you could save me. Got me falling through ashes in the dust of the winter blue. Crying no, take me back home, don't leave me alone. Keep me from running to you, still lost in the ashes in the wake of the burning truth. Rising no, up in the night, don't put out your firewall. Keep me from longing for you. Hold me through the violence, slowly with your silent prayer. Take me back home now, cover me whole now, down in the ocean of you. Got me falling through ashes in the dust of the winter blue. Crying no, take me back home, don't leave me alone. Keep me from running to you, lost in the ashes in the wake of your burning truth. Rising no, up in the night, don't put out your firewall. Keep me from longing for you. Running after you, running after you, running after you. Morning light, break me through the dark. One so bright, show your dying star. Cold as ice, piercing through the heart. Warm the skies, melt the days apart. Wanna hide away, try to run away, tell me if you could save me. Got me falling through ashes in the dust of the winter blue. Crying no, take me back home, don't leave me alone. Keep me from running to you, still lost in the ashes in the wake of the burning truth. Rising no, up in the night, don't put out your firewall. Keep me from longing for you. Awake, caught in fantasies, replace broken memories. Gonna find a way, gotta throw away all of what you gave, no, can't let this go. Wanna hide away, Morning light, break me through the dark. One so bright, show your dying star. Cold as ice, piercing through the heart. Warm the skies, melt the days apart. Wanna hide away, try to run away, tell me if you could save me. Got me falling through ashes, in the dust of the winter blue. Crying no, take me back home, don't leave me alone. Keep me from running to you, still lost in the ashes, in the wake of your burning truth. Rising no, up in the night, don't put out your fire, won't keep me from longing for you. Awake, caught in fantasies, can't replace broken memories. Gonna find a way, gotta throw away all of what you gave, no, can't let this go. Wanna hide away, try to run away, tell me if you could save me. Got me falling through ashes, in the dust of the winter blue. Crying no, take me back home, don't leave me alone. Keep me from running to you, still lost in the ashes, in the wake of your burning truth. Rising no, up in the night, don't put out your fire, won't keep me from longing for you. Oh, hold me through the violence, slowly with your silent prayer. Take me back home now, cover me whole now, down in the ocean of you. Got me falling through ashes, in the dust of the winter blue. Crying no, take me back home, don't leave me alone. Keep me from running to you, lost in the ashes, in the wake of your burning truth. Rising no, up in the night, don't put out your fire, keep me from longing for you. Running after you, running after you, running after Morning light, break me through the dark. One so bright, show your dying star. Cold as ice, piercing through the heart. Warm the skies, melt the days apart. Wanna hide away, try to run away, tell me if you could save me. Got me falling through ashes,